Hello, everyone. Welcome to World Affairs. I'm Ray Suarez, co-host of the World Affairs podcast and radio program, which airs on KQED every Monday evening at 8 p.m. I'm also Washington correspondent for Euronews. We're recording today's conversation for broadcast on the radio. Later on, I'll be asking your questions. So if you have anything you'd like me to ask, please use the Q&A feature down there on Zoom to send me your questions. While the world has been focused on the coronavirus pandemic, a lot's been happening in Israel. Yet another general election is scheduled for March 23rd. That's the fourth in just 2 years. Israel is forging ahead, normalizing relations with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, following the signing of the Abraham Accords. Israel is leading the world with its vaccine rollout, which has reached more than half its citizens, but has controversially inoculated few Palestinians living in the occupied territories. We'll discuss these topics and much more with today's guest. Shlomi Kofman is Israel's Consul General in San Francisco and has been in that role since 2017. Previously, he served as a policy advisor to the Deputy Foreign Minister at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Jerusalem. Over the course of a 20-year diplomatic career, Shlomi Kofman has held posts in New York, Washington, Bangkok, and Shanghai. Consul General, welcome to World Affairs.
Thank you so much, Ray. It's good to be with you. Good to be with your audience, and thank you for hosting me. It's great to be with you.
Let's begin with the upcoming Israeli election and the challenge of trying to govern without a solid governing coalition. Bring us up to speed with what's happening in the Israeli government now and why you have to have another general election so short a time after the last one.
So it's, first of all, thank you for the question. The Israeli politics is really something which is, is a political arena which is fantastic and interesting to watch. Our
Stand by. We'll get the consul back. You're on mute, sir.
Okay.
So there you go.
Okay.
Begin your answer again.
Thank you. So I'm saying the Israeli political arena is a very interesting political arena. It's what is called a parliamentary system, whereas you require to have a coalition, which is so different than the system in the United States or in many other countries. So once none of the parties have a solid majority to control, which is over 60, it needs to come to agreement with other parties in order to build a coalition. In the past, given the Israeli, I would say the Israeli different communities and different groups of societies, in the past 2-3 years, we see a lot of smaller party, whereas there is no one dominant party which crosses the 60. So the coalition really didn't, each time there was a different reason why things started again, or once there is no solid majority. And therefore what we see now is a fourth round of election. Having said that, what's important in this is to, in my opinion, is to look at the solidity of the system, of the democratic process, of the fact that the politicians are going back each time and again to the people, and the process works. Now, we'll probably see a similar, coalition government or different variation of coalition government after upcoming elections. And still, the resilience of the Israeli democracy, the resilience of the institution, the resilience of the process, this is what is examined here, and which proves itself as very strong.
Yeah, I think that's fair, given the fact that it's Likud that's been a leader of coalition after coalition. So while it might sound like instability, it's in some ways it's not. But you do have to have another election, and it's fair to say, Consul General, that there are many parliamentary democracies around the world that don't have general elections as frequently as Israel has had to have. What is it about the mix of parties that makes your coalition so fragile? I know you've got a complicated society, and the range of parties illustrates how complicated the society is. But hadn't there been an attempt to alter the formulas for awarding Knesset seats to put in thresholds that would limit the effect of little parties, parties that might also make coalition governments unstable? And I don't know why there you go. You're back.
Yeah. Like jumping. And there was a change in the threshold at each party. You're right, Ray, in the threshold. Still, I think the different groups in the society, which is represented in the parliament, and really the beauty of Israeli parliament, in a way, it's also the complexity, but the beauty is the fact that it's so diverse. And you have representation, direct representation of different groups in the society. But at the same time, it makes it more challenging to have a stable government in a long time, for a long time, as we saw in the past 2 years. Yet we saw some of the governments merging with other governments because of the change of the threshold. So then basically and I think, the past year has been a very challenging year for all of us. And it was a mix in Israel of politics and the economic challenges and the coronavirus. So it all came together to see this fourth election. We could actually see this fourth round of elections maybe earlier if we wouldn't have this government kind of coming together and passing this year. But it's the complexity and the diversity, I would say. The complexity of the diversity of the society and the complexity of let's say, of coming together and preserving it for a long time. We had similar, not so frequent, but we had similar, rounds of elections in the past. But again, not so frequent. But probably also because of the same reasons as we have now. It's a matter of formulating a stable and solid government that will last for 4 years. And yet, it's also important to remember something else. Let's go look at the history that we saw that we had. We had 3 to 4 years governments in place. So this time, it's kind of a more shaky and more challenging period.
Does the fact that the current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, may face trial for corruption, does that make running a general election, not necessarily just from the politics of it, but even from the legality of it, does it make it a complex thing to have a national election while the Prime Minister is under a cloud?
Well, there is, there were other instances in the past, and the person is, of course, is innocent until it's proven
Sure.
otherwise. I think that in this case, the Prime Minister have been conducting a fantastic policy in the past year with the coronavirus. He's been leading the fight against the Iranian dominance in the region. So I think there is no place to question whether the legal process somehow disturbs anything else. And we can be proud of our achievement in the past year with the vaccination process, with fighting the coronavirus, with Abraham Accords, and this is all under the leadership of the Prime Minister. So I think we're in pretty good shape on that.
And we'll definitely talk more about the COVID battle later on in the program. Israel has been breaking out of its isolation in symbolic ways and in substantive ways. But let's talk about the symbolism first. There weren't active hostilities between Israel and many of the countries with which you now have diplomatic relations. But still, is it a kind of a relief to have a formal peace with them?
Well, it's definitely this past year, which was difficult for all of us, brought an excellent news, which is the 3 accords, 3 diplomatic agreements with UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco, and Sudan as well on the way. And it's not only a relief, but it's a new horizon. It's a new period when we can fly in 3 hours to the Gulf, and we have so many And you see Israeli companies, like about 4,000 Israeli companies are already engaging in conversations with counterparts in the Gulf. You see 70,000 Israelis already visited this area. It's a reflection of a warm peace, which is so fantastic and so encouraging. And it shows the opportunity that we have here, and not only with these countries, but also with other countries in the region, to have a peace that will, a flourishing peace, a peace that will bring people together. And that's the beauty of it.
Is it different from what you have with Egypt and Jordan? Israel has had a formal peace with Egypt for decades now, but the number of people who travel between the two countries is tiny. And the border is moved. Egyptian territory has been restored, but no warmth came with it.
Well, the relationship with Egypt a very special one, and it has a huge history. It has also more historical depths to it, etc. It's a different type of relationship because of the proximity, because of the interest. We work very closely with the Egyptian government. There is a cooperation on the economic front, on the fight against terrorism, on security. Same with Jordan. But I think these are two separate. It's really comparing one type of relationship to a different type of relationship, and we cherish both relationships. They have different backgrounds, and we work together with these governments in order to strive and make them better in the future.
In practice, now the substance part of it, what does the normalization of relations between Israel and, for instance, the United Arab Emirates look like? What changes now with the UAE having an embassy in Israel? Will there be Emirati visitors? Will Israelis open commercial ties in ways that they've been either barred from or could do only with great difficulty before?
So it looks like, first of all, it's important to mention that we just yesterday welcomed the new UAE ambassador to Israel, and he was greeted by the prime minister. He was greeted by the foreign minister. And it's really fantastic to see the UAE flag in Israel. Beyond that, we have agreements which were signed already, investment agreements that were signed, cooperation on health, cooperation on tourism. You see the Bahraini foreign minister visited Israel. So I think it's going to advance on every possible level. Investment, of course, and technology on every possible level, just because we're talking about small countries. We talk about countries that are interested to develop their economy, their technology, the outreach. Countries which are also feel threatened by the Iranian extremism in the region. So I think that there is a lot of clear interest and clear values that bring us together to advance this relationship on all possible levels. As I mentioned to you, we have 70,000 Israelis flying already, visiting UAE and Bahrain, Abu Dhabi and Dubai. We have companies flying there, so it really looks fantastic.
One thing that didn't come up with each of these announcements, interestingly, if you've been following the region for a long time, is the Palestinians. It wasn't that long ago where every single meeting of the Arab League included a resolution against Israel by the members of the Arab League, who would talk about the fate of people living in the occupied areas, who would say that it was impossible to make peace with Israel until some sort of permanent solution was forged for the Palestinian people. And yet, when these agreements were announced with great fanfare and happiness, Palestine wasn't mentioned at all. What happened? So
I think Palestinian issue was mentioned in at least one or two statements that were made by during the White House lawn. It was mentioned. At the same time, I think these countries came to fruition and to conclusion that their relationship with Israel should not be a hostage of the Palestinian matter. And at the same time, they also came to a conclusion that the relationship and their conversation with Israel is more beneficial for the peace and stability in the region. So boycotting, which the Palestinians are advancing on different occasions, including the ICC like today, is not something that is helping to advance peace in the region, but rather a conversation. If we have a dialogue together, we can reach to what we hope for instead of boycotting each other, which doesn't, which prevents any dialogue and conversation. So I think this is a major change, and of course, the regional circumstances, threats in the region, stability versus destabilizing extreme forces like Iran is trying to promote. That's also, I think, part of the issue.
One other country which has seen a lot of developments on the diplomatic front in recent years with Israel is the United States. The U.S. was an early supporter of a two-state solution, a process that results in a self-governing Palestinian state living side by side in peace with Israel. It was American policy under Democratic presidents and under Republican presidents, but things changed under President Trump. Will they change again under President Biden?
Well, I think will they change? We know, and it's clearly stated what is the Biden's administration relationship. But I think the hope and prayer for peace in the Middle East, in our region, the end of hostilities, I would say the stopping of incitement against Israel, the stop of education against inciting education against Israel, and is something which is crucial for the region. I think we see that eye to eye. The well-being of the region and the peace is natural. We always strive for peace, and we hope that we'll find a way to go back to conversation, negotiation with the Palestinians as it was before.
The United States, when the Biden administration took over, rejoined the UNRWA, which supports Palestinian refugee populations in various places, gives relief of various kinds to the Palestinian people. Did Israel oppose that? Was Israel neutral on the question? If the United States wanted to be in UNRWA, that was their business. Did it have any opinion on it at all?
So we, of course, are not against a relief to the Palestinian people and people who are being hijacked and people who are being, I would say, terrorized, especially by the Hamas within its territory. What we are opposing that happening with UNRWA is that UNRWA schools and UNRWA institutions are being supportive of Hamas terrorist activities and incitements. And what we hope to see is that the money which is given, the support which is given, is not being channeled into this direction, but rather into directions which can bring a real relief as well as a better life for the Palestinians.
Just before we came on air today, the International Criminal Court announced that it had decided to take the case of accusations of war crimes in Israeli-Palestinian conflicts in 2013 and 2014. I believe those are the 2 years in question. And like the United States, Israel is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court. What is your government's position on the decision to take this case? Will you cooperate in any investigation of events on the ground during the time in question?
Look, Ray, it's really absurd, and it's a very unfortunate decision. We see it as a morally bankrupt and just legally flawed decision. A political decision which is taken by a prosecutor which is about to end her term and is basically dictating a sort of political avenue. Israel is a democracy, democratic state with independent, effective legal system, and we're not a member of the ICC. And we see the decision to open investigation as a breach, basically, of the court's mandate, because the court cannot prosecute and kill against countries which are not members of the court. And we, of course, also encouraged by the support we got from the United States and from other countries, seeing, coming out against the decision that the prosecutor decided to take. So it's very unfortunate. We will, and we're very determined to protect our citizens and protect our soldiers, and those who are basically defending the only one Jewish state in the world. Look, the ICC was established as a result of the war crimes in the Second World War of persecution of 6 million Jews. So to turn the court after so many years, when there are so many hostilities, when there are so many massacres happening just across the border in Syria, they're not examining Syria, but they're coming after Israel. So if someone can explain why why the Syria case is no and Israel yes, that is something that may somehow be an explanation, but we don't see any explanation in that. So
I'm sorry, finish.
Yeah, go ahead.
Today's announcement also provides for the possibility of an investigation into Palestinian misdeeds in that same period. Will Israel allow investigators onto territory that it controls, whether in Israel proper or in areas under Israeli occupation or administration? Or are you basically saying the ICC is not coming to lands that we control?
I would say the following. Israel has a very robust judicial system. And it investigated in the past, as it investigated this time, and as it will investigate in the future if there is anything. The court has to. One thing is that, as I said earlier, we are not part of the court, but it should respect a process which is taken by the judicial system in a democratic society, and count on it, same as it counts on other systems. Which are as it counts on other systems. That's basically would be my approach to that. I think the fact that there is a decision taking, it just again, it's morally bankrupt and legally flawed. It should not be happened, and it's a bad decision.
Back to the United States, it has all but abandoned in its own diplomatic language until now the advocacy for a two-state solution. Has Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ever officially said the two-state solution is dead, we're done, we're not proceeding, as if that's a reality? Or, as sometimes happens in diplomacy, is it being left as a living concept and just simply not being worked on?
No, I don't. He never said that, and that's not the policy. We have never abandoned that. And one should go back to what is called his Prime Minister's Bar Ilan speech, talking about the two-state vision and possible solution. But as long as there is no recognition by the Palestinians of Israel as a Jewish state, as long as we're not talking about leadership on the Palestinian side that will stop the incitement, stop hatred, stop pushing Israel into ICC or the Human Rights Council condemnation, until then, I mean, it's hard to talk, it's hard to explain to the people why there is a resumption of negotiation. And by the way, on the ground, there is a continuous relationship going on between institutions. There is security coordination, there is health coordination, there is economic coordination, and things are happening. But unfortunately, the leadership on the Palestinian side doesn't send a message of reconciliation, of peace and coming together. they should try and get more inspiration from other countries in the region in terms of coming together and making peace.
Well, Israel has long said that it can't be a two-side agreement because there is nobody on the other side who wants peace. I've had this said to me by Israeli diplomats and elected officials for years. But then Israel proceeds on its own. Is your country creating realities, economic, political, physical, geographic, that really represent the creation of a one-state solution?
No, I don't think we're moving towards one-state solution. I think we're in a situation that negotiation can be resumed, conversation can be resumed. There is a respect for what was agreed in the Oslo Agreement. The Palestinian Authority is functioning, the responsibilities are in place, but at the same time, you need to have two for tango. And if the other side creates, physical barriers, physical issues you can remove. But when you educate your kids for incitement for hatred, when the textbooks, and we see European countries removing their support for Palestinian educational system because the textbooks are representing and bringing up hatred and educating for hatred, as long as you have that, as long as you have people's mind being brainwashed for hatred of Israel, this is much harder to fix than any removal of a house or a barrier. And as long as there is no strategic decision to start educating for culture of peace, that will be very hard to bring the people up to a place where they will be good neighbors.
The Palestinians are eloquent advocates for their own cause and their own case, and I wouldn't try to make it for them, but they do point out that if you look at a map of that part of the world, the lands that might have been assumed to one day become part of a Palestinian state, and let's leave aside Jerusalem for a minute and just talk more broadly about territories that were once part of Jordan before the 1967 war. If you look at a map of Israel today and where there's effective Israeli control, where there are settlements from citizens of Israel proper, Jewish citizens of Israel proper who now live in those territories, the Palestinians are being left a smaller and smaller non-contiguous patchwork of territory in what I think around the time of the Oslo Accords would have been assumed to be part of their eventual state. Is that fair?
Well, I think that again, the major blocks which existed there were negotiated in different rounds as being part of remaining as part of the blocks and Israel security. But again, I think Ray, the physical solutions can be found. The question whether we can change people's mind, and that's the main thing for me. How can we convince our people that it's important to give up and compromise when there is an ongoing incitement and persecution of Israel and Israelis in different international forums? We're going back to it's again against the ICC, and in every possible corner we have that. So again, physical issues can be solved, but issues of education, approach, and neighboring are much more difficult to do.
I want to remind our listeners that in a little while I'll start taking your questions for the Consul General. Let's go back to the U.S.-Israeli relationship. Israel made no secret of its opposition to the non-proliferation deal with Iran and American participation in it. Prime Minister Netanyahu came to Washington as the accord was being debated and opposed the policy of a sitting U.S. president at the invitation of Republican leaders in Congress. Very unusual in the history of the bilateral relationship. Now, the Biden administration is looking for a way to get back into the JCPOA, as it's called. Will Israel make its feelings known as openly as it did the last time? In retrospect, was that a good idea, the way Israel handled it during the Obama years?
Thank you, Ray. Look, we have to remind the audience, and I would love to repeat that again and again. Iran is basically Israel's number one national security threat to our 8,600 square miles country. That's all. It's 1/19th of California for those who want kind of to understand the difference. We have the Iranians present or trying to be present today in Syria, have a very strong presence in Lebanon, and striving to planning, building, executing all what they can in order to reach to a nuclear weapon. And they're stating that. Our history showed that when you have a deed, an intention, capability coming together and not being stopped, that has resulted in 6 million Jews in the 40s. And we're determined to do everything to protect Israel and not to allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. I think today we have a very, and that was stated, we see that from Israel, and we see it also from the administration. There is a very close relationship and coordination on the Iranian issue. I think the lessons of the past kind of are clear to everyone. And I think there is a close consultation, and as Secretary of State said, there will be consultation with U.S. allies in the region. Israel is number one ally, U.S. ally in the region, is the closest friend. We have relationship on so many levels, and the intimacy of the conversation here, I'm sure, will be beneficial for all of us. We basically see the same goal. There is the same goal to Israel and to the United States. And if there are differences or different approaches to what is the solution is, whether to reapproach the JCPOA or to come to it from a different angle, this is something that can be discussed and will be discussed and is discussed between Washington and Jerusalem.
Israel accuses Iran of attacking a cargo ship in the Gulf of Oman. What happened?
So it's a cargo ship which is which is owned by an Israeli businessman, and there are hundreds of them, and that was on the way to, I think, either port of Dubai or on the way out, or I think actually it was carrying cars from East Asia to Dubai or Abu Dhabi. And basically, what we know is that there were two explosions on the side of the ships that didn't sink the ship, but caused a damage, which is repairable, but still causes substantial damage. But we said clearly we see it as an Iranian action that it tends to destabilize and disrupt the international water, the international maritime traffic, which is so important to the world. And as we stated, it's again the Iranian terrorism, the Iranian attempt to destabilize the region.
One issue that Israel is getting notice for around the world is its handling of the coronavirus. The distribution of vaccine has been particularly effective. I think it's the highest percentage of an adult population in the world that's gotten the vaccine in Israel. And yet interestingly, among the Haredi, the highly observant communities, there's been resistance to social distancing, resistance to masking, resistance to the closure of gatherings and institutions that bring people close together. So you seem to have two different storylines here, tremendous success inside your national territory and also a pretty substantial population saying, we're just not going to cooperate. Did it give the government some difficult moments to try to figure out how to proceed with such a large population saying, we just don't want to play?
Well, thank you for that question, Ray. First of all, we really we're proud to see and to see this amazing achievement of vaccinating the majority of our population, adult population. I think close to 90% of the population. I would say something like close to 5 million people have been vaccinated with first dose, and about 3.5 or maybe closer to 4 have been vaccinated with second. So we really see it's a huge achievement, but also in a way, Israel, as the CEO of Pfizer said, Israel has been a laboratory, and this is a contribution to the world, kind of sharing our experience, sharing our results with Pfizer and to help to the rest of the world. With the Haredi, talking about the Haredi population, there was some resistance in certain circles, not in every circles. It took time until some of the schools were closed. Yes, there was resistance, and that was, to the extent it was possible to deal with, it was dealt with. But I think we are on the way of really opening up the country this month, and including flights, slowly getting to herd immunity, including within the Haredi population. Look, dealing with more conservative communities is more challenge when it comes with scientific approaches, scientific challenges. But I think people are getting that, and we're getting there, and things are getting better.
Well, there are leaders, individual rabbis that are very influential in that community. Mm-hmm. Was it a question in some cases of getting to those men and having them signal to their followers, it's a good thing to do, get the vaccine, wear the mask? Yeah. Were they helpful?
Yeah, it was again, that's part of the special fabric of the Israeli society. You have a rabbi who is a spiritual leader, who is influential, and that required the political level, the political leaders to approach the rabbis, to explain, to ask them to call their followers. In most cases, it happened. Of course, when we saw different let's say funerals and so on, people are gathering, not always obeying that. Again, that goes into a conversation, but it's not something which you can solve in one day or kind of explain easily. So, I hope that it's starting to shift, and we'll see better results also among this community. And we saw also rabbis, coming and getting shots and calling their followers to get vaccinated. So,
for all the positive attention you got for the tremendous response with the vaccine in Israel proper, there's been controversy over the lack of availability of the vaccine in places under Israeli occupation or Israeli administration. Were decisions made that particularly excluded the large number of Palestinians living on Israeli-administered land? Was there a decision to roll out so that you would do them second, or open the way to them being vaccinated second? How did that happen?
You mean how did that happen with the Palestinians?
How were the decisions made that led to such a low availability of vaccine in places under Israeli occupation.
So let's talk about the frameworks with the Palestinian Authority. The responsibility for the healthcare and for the health authorities of the Palestinians is under the Palestinian Authority, and that's part of the Oslo Agreement. And we, in agreement with them, of course, we respect that and we work with them. And from day one, there were conversations, as I mentioned earlier, between the health authorities in Israel and among the Palestinians in order to monitor, see what's happening, and help the Palestinians in this struggle. Palestinians have been assisted with WHO and been acquiring and getting vaccines also from other states, like from Russia. But in Israel, just 2 days ago, announced that it's going to vaccinate about 120,000 Palestinians, especially those who are coming into Israel. So, it's important to remember that because of the proximity, the easiness of spreading a virus from Israelis to Palestinians and back is very easy. And therefore, we work with their authorities in order to help and assist, including training of personnel, including equipment that came from Israel in this struggle.
But that very thing, the ease of the passage of the virus, wouldn't that have argued for a vaccine rollout that would affect both sides of the line, that would have vaccinated Israelis living in Israel proper and Palestinians living in their territories equally, because of the way the two populations interact and travel across the line?
Yeah. So again, there was a coordination on that issue between the authorities, and there was a joint assistance. And again, and remember, there is also an issue of language, of ability, of logistics, of ability, like how do you deploy people, etc. So you have to work with the Palestinian Authority people on the ground. Israeli personnel doesn't speak Arabic. So you need to, it's not that we come and we start vaccinating. We did work with them. We assisted in what we can, in what was accepted by them. And they also use their other tools from other places. So, things are sometimes getting very easily to headlines in the press, but on the ground, our health authorities and our definitely understand the importance of that. And that's why we work with them. And that's why the decision of vaccinating 120,000 Palestinians that was taken a couple of days ago.
Let me remind you, listeners, if you want to join the conversation, click in on the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen and give me a question for Consul General Kofman. Alex asks, Israel's innovative culture and technology leadership is legendary. How will Israel continue to build on this success in a world that is characterized by cyber threats and cyber warfare?
So I think we are marching with the beat and with the technological development. Part of, and Alex, thank you for that question. We, our reality comes together, in our challenges, regional and security challenges, are coming together with our innovative spirit, and combining the two brings the Israeli practice and the Israeli kind of strive for technology, for science, and for development. It brings it together, and that's why we see this incredible number of new solutions in new areas which are being developed all the time in Israel. Let's remember that we have over 400 multinational companies present in Israel. Most of the R&D centers out of Silicon Valley, first and foremost, were open in Israel. So, and of course, the combination of what, as I said earlier, our reality and people coming out of the military with the incredible innovation, there are pushing us to continue innovate and develop more. Remember, we have 9% of our population is in the tech, but it's responsible for the majority, for a bigger chunk of the economy and Israel's success, Israel GDP. So there are several drivers to this engine, which are the reality, the creativity, and the strive for success in technology, which are pushing that together.
As the Consul General in San Francisco, are you, in effect, the ambassador from Israeli tech to American tech in Silicon Valley?
Well, I'm ambassador from Israel to this region, and it gives me a huge pleasure working with the tech and with the tech companies in Northern California, but also 5 other states. We work all the way up to Alaska and Washington State and Oregon, Montana, and Idaho. And I really have a huge pleasure of working with the business sectors in this region, and of course focusing a lot of tech. But tech tech doesn't end only in internet. Tech also ends today in agriculture, in climate change, in water, and we are promoting and working hard to make the connection between this region and Israel stronger and more robust and more deeper.
Malka asks, I'm an Israeli living in Santa Rosa. Both my parents were pioneers from Belarus in Russia. We came to a barren land in 1936 and built a beautiful kibbutz in the Jordan Valley. The corruption in Israel is a cancer to Israeli existence. Please, Consul, comment.
Well, I think corruption. It's an issue that exists everywhere, not only in Israel. And I think we're dealing with that to this and that extent in different places in the world. And no one is perfect, and we're not perfect. We're not immune of this fault and bad practices. And that's why we have strong authorities, strong police, strong judicial system that is trying to stop it all the time. But again, we are not immune than other countries, and you see that also in other places.
Berisha asks, I have a question about foreign policy. Israel a few months ago recognized Kosovo, and Serbia and Kosovo agreed in Washington, D.C. to locate their embassies in Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, Serbia and Kosovo want to be member states of the EU, and some EU member states already disagree with Kosovo and Serbia when it comes to locating their embassies in Jerusalem. Why does Israel want these countries to locate their embassies in Jerusalem? What can Kosovo and Serbia do in case they get in trouble on the way to EU integration because of this embassy issue? How long will it take until EU member states move their embassies to Jerusalem?
So we
a lot of questions, Berisha, but we'll try to get them all answered.
I'll answer it. I'll try to answer all of them. We hope that all the embassies, and we welcomed the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem last year, but we hope that all the embassies will move to Jerusalem, which is the capital of Israel, and then the capital of the Jewish people for thousands of years. And having the embassies in Jerusalem is recognizing, and it's a huge statement. And we welcome that. We welcomed Kosovo and Serbia relocating their embassies. What it may cost, look, I'm not sure that this is, on the way to EU, and knowing a little bit about EU joining process, that I'm not sure that's going to be the major obstacle, major issue in joining the EU. But I may be wrong. I'm not an expert on that. But having the embassies in Jerusalem is something that we all hope that will happen sooner than later.
Mark asks, based on your previous responses regarding physical barriers, expanding Israeli settlements not being a hindrance to a future two-state solution, are you expressing a commitment by the Israeli government that Israeli settlements within occupied Palestinian territories would be withdrawn should conditions be met by Palestinians for a two-state agreement.
What I suggest is that to look at Israel's previous records and see how we relocated cities and villages from Sinai, and we relocated them from Gaza Strip, and that's a proof. That's a proof that we always, when we felt that there is a chance for peace, we were ready to pay the price. To say, to talk about this commitment, that commitment, I think we're still in a premature stage because we just don't have the other side to speak with. And I think it's for the parties to discuss one things will come, I would say, to a more closer negotiation.
But over the years, when the two-state solution was still the official policy of Israel, the government created policies that helped more Israeli citizens move into the occupied territories. Didn't you make it harder, in effect, to allow for the creation of a Palestinian state by doing that?
I think that in all the negotiation rounds, it was recognized. Also, when during Bush administration and then and later on, that there are certain realities on the ground to be recognized, whether because strategic first or because things have changed. Now, harder is again is a matter of that it can be negotiated or can be discussed. But I'm going back again to the issue of education, incitement, etc. Removal of houses. We removed not only houses, we moved cemeteries from Gaza Strip. We didn't remove some of the installations. We left them for the Palestinians. A house is a physical barrier that can be removed. What much harder to rebuild is what is called people's approach in the culture of peace. And if there is no leadership that teaches its kids for respecting and living and recognizing your neighbor, and when Israel is not on a map of any of the Palestinian textbook, I'm repeating, not on a map of any Palestinian textbook. So what are we talking about? How are we gonna remove, stand back, and allow kind of another terrorist entity to be next to us? And where is the end of the negotiation? Is there going to be a recognition or acceptance of end of hostilities? So as long as you or end of claims, I'm sorry, not the end of hostilities. So as long as you don't sit together and say, I'm recognizing you and I'm ready to compromise, we're not talking about compromising on houses.
If you and I were to go to high schools in Manama, the capital of Bahrain, or Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, or fly into the UAE and visit a high school there, do you think what the kids are learning in schools is that different? If we were to look at their textbooks, what kind of information would they contain about Israel in particular, or Jews more broadly?
So I don't have the answer for that because I didn't have an opportunity to examine, and I don't want to kind of say that there's something which I don't know. But UAE or Bahrain, etc., the statement, the acceptance, the recognition were wholeheartedly open and in full. And here you have an authority basically that is, on one hand, saying that it wants to reach peace, but on the other hand, it's inciting paying money to terrorists, and educating kids for hatred. And as long as that doesn't change, it will be very hard to find a way to compromise.
We have a question on vaccine diplomacy. Yesterday, Israel's Attorney General chastised Prime Minister Netanyahu, telling him he cannot single-handedly share the country's surplus vaccines with far-flung allies in Africa and Latin America, and that such an important decision cannot be made by the Prime Minister alone. It's an interesting question and one that a lot of countries around the world are wrestling with right now. How do you get vaccine to 7.5 billion people around the planet?
So I think there is a discussion, robust discussion. Part of it is also in the press whether that can be performed or not. Again, headlines and call it vaccine diplomacy. It's one thing, but we the Prime Minister found it important to try and help other countries with vaccination. But I think it's kind of things are in works. We did send to Guatemala and to Honduras. But I think about other countries is still in progress and just to be seen down the road.
But is in your system, can the Attorney General stop the Prime Minister from having the Ministry of Health, for instance, dispatch more vaccine?
As I think it's more given to legal folks and to lawyers to determine whether the vaccine should be treated as national treasure, and the government has to decide on that. But I just don't know I don't know the question. That's why I said the answer. That's why I said that it's probably has to be discussed within the legal. I would say legal authorities, what can be done, and whether the Prime Minister can decide and send it was the right process.
Saul asks, how is Israel promoting trade in South America? And he indicates he's in Peru.
Well, thank you for the question. So we are present in these countries. We have, of course, embassies and we have economic attachés. I think in the past 2 or 3 years, we started to have a direct flight to Brazil, which made it much faster and shortened to Latin America. We have embassy in almost in every major country in Latin America. So there's definitely a very robust work and cooperation. We do send vocational and professional experts to some of the Latin American countries, especially focusing on agriculture, on water, and on other areas. So there is a lot going on, a lot of trade, and the direct flight is definitely helping that. And of course, having this country's presence in Israel is also a huge contributor to this area. We do have. We have, thanks God, we have a lot of Spanish speakers, so we can, it's also easy to communicate. Many people who came from Argentina, who came from Mexico to Israel and Brazil, which is Portuguese, but also there is Brazilian community. So there is a lot of going on, and there is a very warm and strong relationship with these countries.
Consul General Shlomi Kofman, thanks a lot for joining us today on World Affairs.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to your audience. It was fantastic.
And thanks to you, our audience. We know that Zoom fatigue is real, and we appreciate that you spent part of your time with us today. Please join World Affairs next Wednesday, March 10th, at 12 p.m. Pacific Time for a live program with the award-winning author and peace builder, Séverine Autesserre. I'll talk with her about her new book, The Front Lines of Peace, An Insider's Guide to Changing the World. She makes the case that building peace doesn't require billions in aid or massive interventions. She says the key is giving power to local citizens. Please join us then. And thanks again for joining us today. Have a good week.